Hi everyone, this is Counseling 2250, Corey's Chapter 11, Loneliness and Solitude. So being alone is not something to be avoided at all costs, but as part of the human experience. Just think about the pandemic and, think about the beginning. Some of us live alone and some of us live with family members, right? And either way, we could still feel alone, whether we are actually alone physically or if we're just like surrounded by all of our family members, we can still also feel alone and disconnected. So it's kind of a little bit of both if you think about how this chapter is going to talk about this. If we do not enjoy alone time or time alone, we would not enjoy time with others. It's kind of like, you want to appreciate being alone, but you also then go, you know what, it's so much fun to be able to hang out with my friends and talk and, do things together and stuff like that. So you appreciate, that alone time, but you also then learn how to appreciate time with others as well. In some respect, we are alone, even though we have meaningful connections with others. And that's a very existential point of view, which is, we were born alone and we're going to die alone, right? So a lot of times for some people, they see that their entire lives is alone, but really it isn't. Especially if you do work with other people or have friendships, and you realize, you know what, even though I am an individual person who is alone physically, and all that other stuff, that I am still able to connect with other people who probably feel the same way as well. So knowing that we all share something in common makes us less alone. Uh, no one can completely share our unique world of feelings, thoughts, hopes, and memories. And that's something that we realize, right? Sometimes you feel a certain way about something and it's okay. Not everyone has to agree with you. I think that makes you unique and interesting, as well as other people who also think and believe in their own things as well. Now let's talk about the value of solitude. First, we want to know the difference between being alone and being lonely. Loneliness is defined as usually triggered by certain life events: death of someone we love, the decision of another person to leave us or we leave them, a move to a new city, a long stay in a hospital, or a major life decision. So those are the times when people would describe it as feeling lonely or loneliness. Solitude is something that we choose for ourselves. So we choose to be alone. So that would be considered solitude. So just start practicing using those two words. Do you want to be alone or do you want to have some solitude, let's say, okay? If we fill our lives with activities, we risk losing a sense of centeredness. So what that is basically saying is sometimes we say yes to a lot of things because we are avoiding, let's say, some time to ourselves to think about ourselves, okay? Or loneliness, right? That feeling that you might not necessarily like. So what we are worried about is if you say yes to all these things and do all these things, you're actually so overwhelmed that you're actually not taking care of yourself, right? And then you suddenly start to feel like you're losing yourself. So we want to make sure that you're not doing that and that you do portion out time for yourself as well. Solitude allows us to examine our lives, assess what we are doing, gain a sense of perspective. We can ask ourselves, have I become a stranger to myself? Have I been listening to myself or have I been distracted and overstimulated by my busyness? Solitude is used to look within ourselves, to know ourselves better, and to renew our sense of ourselves as a center of choice and directions in our lives, and to trust our inner resources. So it's really great to kind of like regroup by thinking about yourself, spending some time alone in solitude so that you can think about and consider all those things and make sure that you know where you are. The Dalai Lama says that the solitude is a mental state free from distraction, not just time alone. So what that is saying is you're not just physically alone, but you are not distracted. Okay, to really see what's going on, is not distracted by all the concerns that you have, all the things that are due tomorrow or whatever. Think about right now. So let's talk a little bit about the experience of loneliness. When we are lacking in social relationships, when there are strains in these relationships, or when relationships are not satisfying. So those are areas when you start to feel alone or loneliness. If we acknowledge our feelings of loneliness, It can inspire us to change and become who we want to be. So, if you have studied existentialism, you'll realize that a lot of this stuff, this experience of loneliness and suffering, is very, very existential, right? This is why a lot of the descriptions here are like that, where once we feel like we're suffering and we're aware of it, then we can now make a choice of whether or not we want to continue to suffer or to actually change it and enjoy life or find more meaning in our lives. And that's a very existential theoretical framework. Counseling 4500 is usually where you would learn about this. Okay, so there are two types of loneliness according to Wheaton, Lloyd, Dunn, and Hammer. First is transient loneliness. So that is the brief feelings of loneliness that occur when people have satisfactory social relationships in the past but experience some disruption in their social network, such as a breakup or moving to a new place. So this one, transient, means it's not there for very long, okay? Because of something like you broke up with your partner, you feel alone and you feel loneliness, right? Because you just broke up. But usually it's fine. If you're in a relationship, it was fine. It wasn't there. It's just these major events like moving to a new place, like let's say a new city that you don't have any friends in. You're going to feel loneliness, and that's totally normal and that's expected, right? But hopefully what happens is that you're going to start to make friends or whatever, you start dating, and you're not going to feel so alone anymore. The other one is called chronic loneliness, when people are unable to establish meaningful interpersonal relationships over a relatively long period of time. So again, the word chronic means long period or a long time, right? So this type of loneliness is when you cannot establish a relationship with other people when you want to. Okay, it prevents more of a problem of living. Uh, People vulnerable to this experience are divorced, separated, or widowed. Those who live alone or only with their children. And that's something that I'll share with you. Like my mom, when she divorced my father, her husband, um, she never ever dated again. And she says, well, all my love is for you, right? And that is unfortunately not a healthy way to see life, okay? Maybe it was because of this relationship with her that failed that maybe she felt like she was a failure. And I was too young to understand that and talk to her that way, you know? And so she then suddenly somehow put all of that onto me instead, or her children instead, right? And so that becomes a major issue for her. But that's besides the point here. But the thing is, that's a chronic type loneliness. She should have probably dated and, met another person, but part of that is her cultural values of, divorce as being very shameful in specific Asian cultures and stuff like that. If it is chronic, it is usually psychological distress. And I can see that when pertaining to my mom. And you might be able to see that with people that you know as well. There's also two kinds of loneliness described by Irving Yalom, who is a existentialist psychologist. The first one he calls it is called everyday loneliness. It involves the pain of being isolated from other people, interpersonal loneliness associated with the fear of intimacy and feelings of shame, rejection, or being unlovable. So this is having problems communicating and socializing with other people for one reason or another. Maybe you're afraid of intimacy, or you're afraid because you're embarrassed by something, or you feel like no one really can love you. So then you become alone, right? That's everyday loneliness. His other one is called existential loneliness or isolation. It's associated with a profound sense of an unbridgeable gap that separates us from others. So awareness that each of us inhabits a world fully known only to ourselves becomes more meaningful when we are aware that others cannot accompany us into that final destiny. So this one is more of a, we are born alone, we're going to die alone, so we're alone, right? So that's more of an existential loneliness or isolation. Okay, let's talk a little bit about loneliness in the age of connectivity. Some say technology promotes connectivity, while others believe it actually promotes isolation. And I'm sure you've heard of that, right? Like, there's both pro and con when it comes to technology. Connects to the world with similar interests, right? You can find people that like the same thing that you do. Expanding social networks, you're going to meet people from all over the world. Geographic boundaries are gone because before, when you made friends, usually you made friends with people you meet in your neighborhood. or maybe at school or at work or some local community place, right? It's really unlikely that you were just going to make friends if you were born in LA and living in LA to just make a friend in New York without knowing someone over there or being over there, right? But now with the internet and everything, you actually can be friends with someone in New York, in China, in Israel, in Africa, anywhere, and it's not that difficult. Reduces actual face-to-face time because we are on social media, which makes sense as well, right? The more time you spend on the computer, the less time you can actually spend face-to-face with people. So again, there's that pro and con when it comes to the loneliness, but at the same time, it really does matter how you spend your time on social media as well. Because there are pressures to have more online friends can potentially exacerbate loneliness, right? Here's something that was really interesting. When I started to join social media, I had two sets of friends. Friends where I saw them making friends with just people they actually know, right? So I'll be your friend because I actually know you in real life, or I met your friend's friend, at a party, and now I want to be friends with you as well. But I also had another group of people who had thousands of friends, but they've never really talked to them or have really known them. Okay, so there's a difference between those two groups of people who are trying to get that, right? So that's always really interesting because what happens, is it really just a quantity or is it quality or is it both? Is one being sacrificed for the other? Relationship quality, I'm sorry, relationship quantity replacing relationship quality. So that becomes problematic because you just feel validated, you feel special, you feel important because you have, let's say, 1 million followers or 1 million friends. But if you were ever in trouble, how many of those 1 million people that, let's say, follow you or friends with you will actually be able to help you out? Does that make sense? So you want to think about that. And again, there is so much research when it comes to social media and people's self-esteem levels, especially young women. It becomes a major concern. All right, let's talk about learning to control the fear of loneliness. Loneliness influences our physical health and psychological well-being. May be identified as the lonely periods in our lives with pain and struggle, right? Usually you'll say that was the time where I felt the most alone was because of these things, right? Associated with the time of rejection of self and being cut off from others. Sometimes to avoid rejection, we actually refuse to reach out to others, which becomes a paradox. So you're afraid of rejection, so then you don't even bother with it. But what happens is if you maintain that type of thinking all the time, obviously you will be alone. If you are willing to say, you know what, some people don't like me, some people love me. So let me figure out who is who so I understand and I can build relationships. Yeah, you might think someone is really cool and you try to be their friend and they don't want to be your friend and you get rejected. That's okay. But you know what? Let's try it with this other person. Let's see what happens there. Maybe that person will go, hey, I think you are super cool. Let's be friends. And then suddenly you are starting to build relationships that way. Okay. We lie to ourselves and attach ourselves to other people, thinking it will resolve our feelings of loneliness. So sometimes we actually purposely go out and hang out with people we don't like or we don't care about because we are so alone. Or, so what happens there is then it's not a meaningful interpersonal relationship, which is basically relationships with other people. So then again, the quality is not so great there, is it? We try to escape silence by overscheduling, controlling our lives so that there can be no surprises, dedicate ourselves to social activities, use a relationship to avoid feelings of loneliness. Think about just, do you know someone who has never not been in a relationship? Once they break up with someone, they're immediately dating long term or in a relationship with another person immediately. And you'll hear sometimes they'll say, I don't know how to handle myself when I'm alone. Therefore, I'm going to be with someone all the time. Um, Numb ourselves with alcohol and drugs, emotional eating to fill the emptiness, spend hours watching television, being on the internet, or playing video games. The way we present ourselves to the world may try to mask that loneliness. And some of us do that, right? We pretend like we have a wonderful life when we really don't, because we don't want people to think or judge us or have pity on us, right? So we'll say, oh yeah, I have all these friends, blah, blah, blah. Sometimes on social media, you'll take pictures that look like you're like having a ton of fun, but you know you weren't, right? And think about other people who also do the same thing over and over and over again. So then they start to build kind of like a lie or live kind of like a lie, right? We pretend to others that, to be what we are not, making us lose sense of self and lean towards alienation. So suddenly you're going to start to feel like, wait a minute, that's my online persona. That's not real me. Why do I have to lie online? Why can't I just be myself? And that's something that we hope that you'll start to think about and see how social media and other things, pressure from your peers, can affect you and how you behave. Now let's talk a little bit about creating our own loneliness through shyness. Shyness is defined as anxiety and excessive caution in interpersonal relationships. Again, interpersonal means relationships with other people. Okay? Timidity, which basically just means shyness in expressing ourselves, being overly sensitive to how we are perceived and reacted to, being embarrassed easily, and experiencing bodily symptoms such as blushing, upset stomach, anxiety, and of course, a racing pulse. Some have chronic shyness and others during specific situations. And it is culturally different. Um, the book talks about collectivist versus individualistic in the sense of a collectivist group. Each individual might be very shy because they actually want to represent the whole, right? So it's not really about them, so they don't want to speak out. Whereas in individualistic societies, you are in, motivated or encouraged to stand out, right? Whereas a collectivist is, we are together as a group, not you as yourself as one person. Shyness becomes a problem only when you hold back from expressing yourself in ways that you would like. So I'll give you an example actually. I had a client who was extremely shy and avoidant. And so we needed to figure out a way to help her overcome it because she actually came in to therapy because of this issue. And we talked a little bit about her upbringing. And part of that is the fact that her mom had a lot of boyfriends. And so she felt embarrassed. And so she didn't want to talk to people because she would be afraid that her new friends that she would make would go, hey, you know, so all four of your siblings have different fathers? Oh, and she was really embarrassed that her friends would be judging her mother because of that. Um, 4 out of 10 people in America say that they are shy. So that's 40%, okay, of people basically saying that they are shy. So if you are shy, you are not alone, definitely. But if you are in the field of counseling or therapy or the helping profession, I'm going to have to be honest here. You really cannot be shy in this field. Um, a lot of the times you're expected to start the conversations and build relationships and to be vulnerable. And if you cannot do that, I'm honestly going to ask you to question whether or not you really do belong in this field. It is a very talk heavy world, counseling and psychology. So if you are aware of that and you know you're shy and you still want to stay here, then I challenge you to start to break down that shyness. Culturally, for me, I was raised to be very quiet and shy, basically, like they were talking about. I really did not talk when I was a kid. I only talked to my friends, but like with adults around and everything, I was always super quiet. And that's partly a cultural thing, right? And as I grew older and I realized, wait a minute, if I'm going to become a teacher, I need to learn how to talk and be comfortable with it. And so I started to motivate myself and teach myself and force myself to do things that were a little uncomfortable, but I knew that overall this was going to be a good thing for everyone. Right. And so, and that's what it is. I mean, you guys all probably think that I'm a super social person, but honestly, I'm actually an introvert. I prefer to be alone over hanging out with a ton of people. But I have learned to appreciate being around other people. Shyness is disabling when it prevents people from expressing their views and expressing their rights. It is difficult to think clearly and communicate effectively. You'll probably know some people who freeze if they had to do a presentation, right? And so that's something that I'm going to ask you, and I'm sure all of your instructors here are going to ask you to keep on talking out loud, to share, to present, to practice it over and over again, because the more you practice, the more you realize that it's okay. You're actually fine. You're probably a great presenter, but you need to try until it doesn't feel like such a big deal anymore. Holds people back from meeting new people, hold people back in their careers, prevent students from speaking up in class and seeking assistance, results in feelings such as depression, anxiety, and loneliness, and develop a dependency on alcohol to relax. And you'll hear about that sometimes, right? They'll do some sort of drug to make themselves become more outgoing. And you don't need that. All you really need is a lot of practice, right? So maybe get together with a friend or two and start forcing yourselves to do things that are a little uncomfortable when it comes to interacting with other people, right? And you'll be amazed about all the interesting people that you will meet. Begin to challenge those fears, often due to not having interpersonal skills. So some of us were never trained to really talk out loud or talk to other people because of our culture or upbringing. So it's something that you might need to practice on. Put yourself in situations where you will be forced to make contact with people and engage in social activities, even if it is scary and uncomfortable. And then challenge your self-defeating thoughts like, I don't want to look ridiculous. So let me bring you back to, let's say, that client that I was talking about before. So what we did, one of the first things we did was, this is again, this is kind of like before cell phones were really popular. So I had my client basically go around, and she had to do this, I think once or twice a day, which is go up to a stranger and say, excuse me, do you know what time it is? Or, excuse me, do you know where the, let's say, the restrooms are? That's all she had to do. Even if she knew the answer to those things, right? She still had to do it out loud, right? Because it doesn't become a part about listening to the information. It's more about the actual behavior of going up to a stranger and just saying, hey, do you mind what time, you tell me what time it is? And she did that regularly until one day she was able to actually talk to a classmate in class and didn't feel so paranoid about everything. And also, we taught her how to not necessarily just always talk about her family, lineage, her heritage, or whatever it is. It was just more about just talking and building a relationship with each other about, each other as opposed to like, being afraid or embarrassed by some part of her family. Shy people say that their biggest barrier to stepping out of their comfort zone is approaching people in social situations and initiating and maintaining a conversation. And I agree. It kind of pains me sometimes, to be at a party and then like having to talk to people. Usually, if you actually do see me at a party, I will probably not talk to a lot of people. But I also don't have a problem going up to someone and talking to them. But my personal experience is, hey, you don't need to do it if you don't want to. However, when I'm at a professional setting, if I see someone, I'm going to go, hi, my name is so-and-so. Nice to meet you. Can I get your name? I will actually force myself to do these things, even though it's a little uncomfortable and weird, because I know that this is appropriate and this is required for my job, right? And I'm okay with that. Okay. If you really hate all of this, then there might be an issue. And then I would also say, why are you in counseling then? Right, loneliness and our life stages. So how we deal with loneliness is influenced by our childhood and our adolescence. And that's because we see how to behave through our parents and the people around us. If parents are constantly fighting, the child may fear being deserted. So they don't talk because they're afraid that that might cause trouble. Fear from an embarrassing experience in public speaking, such as when children are laughing at you if you accidentally start stuttering because you are so nervous, right? Then you will think that people will always laugh at you every time, so you don't even try to publicly speak. Loneliness from being one ethnicity while the environment is another. So it's a feeling of exclusion. And the book talks about a boy who is African American or black going to an all white or all Caucasian school and feeling excluded. And that's why they were shy, is because they did not feel like they were connected. Because studies say that people tend to hang out with people who look like them, right? Um, not, it doesn't always happen, but and again, we're in LA and we're a lot diverse than other places in the country, right? Loneliness felt from not being able to tell an adult about sexual advances from adults. So maybe when you were younger and there was some sort of sexual abuse or something that was very uncomfortable, and so you were like, I'm so afraid to say anything because I don't want to get anyone in trouble or me in trouble. So then you remain quiet even as you grow up older. Constant failure as a child makes a person avoid taking any risks, right? So you need to tell yourself that, you're not going to fail every time, right? But if you believe you're going to fail every time, you probably will fail every time. So you want to try to succeed whenever you can, and hopefully you will. And then that will motivate you to try more things. Also being alone at the hospital. So here's a really interesting thing is that let's say that you had a friend who um, got injured because of a sporting issue, right? A lot of people are going to come at the beginning. They're going to bring flowers and cards. People are going to go visit, play, bring games and play with you. But imagine if that became a year-long injury or a disability, actually, right? You will notice the fall off of people visiting will increase greatly, unfortunately. I'll give you an example. When my father was really sick, so many people went to go visit him at the beginning. But after about 3 months, people started to stop visiting him, right? Part of it is because they don't really know what to say to him anymore. And other people are like, well, I'm busy. I have other things I need to do, right? And he's not necessarily like, someone so important that I need to go visit all the time. And so I could see my dad getting lonely. I would visit him once every 2 weeks because I live in LA and he was living in San Diego. So I couldn't do that. I'll also work at the same time. So but at the beginning, I was visiting every week, and then it became every other week. And then after a while, when school was really, really busy, it was like once a month. And then after like let's say 5 years, I was doing it once a month because I just couldn't do it every week or every other week because I was just so busy. And that can cause people to feel really lonely. Now let's talk about the adolescent years. Adolescents and young adults are more likely to experience loneliness than people from older age groups. And the reason why is because people are still developing their identity. So they're trying to figure out who they are. So they feel especially lonely because of that. Ethnic minorities may experience some cultural isolation, especially if they're not familiar with the dominant culture. I don't know about you guys, but when I was, a young person, I basically was a goth because it was just like, life is so lonely. It's just full of suffering, you know, wearing white makeup, dark, features and dark clothing, writing poems about death. That was me. Very emo, right? Young adulthood, struggling with figuring out what to do with your life. And that could also make it very lonely because you'll notice that some of your friends will want to do this, your other friends want to do that, and then you go, what am I supposed to do? I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Who am I? Because again, you're still thinking and learning. Wanting to be in an intimate relationship and how to do it. Let's be honest, a lot of us, the first time we started dating, we had no idea how to date, right? So it was very scary and very alone. And that's what this is what they're talking about. If there is no validation, loneliness can be felt. So if other people don't say, it's going to be okay, right? Or whatever. And usually when we're younger, we don't have people who say that. Maybe our parents do, but we don't believe in everything our parents say during that time period, right? So, if we had our peers were able to tell us and we would feel good and be comforted with it, I think loneliness would have been a little bit different then, right? But usually young kids, we don't have that. And so, we listen to our emo music and then we just believe in that and that's it. Do you have a keep away from me attitude? Is it a self-fulfilling prophecy? Some of us have that thing called resting bee face. Which makes people not want to approach you and talk to you, right? And that's something that if you do have, I would encourage you to recognize it and learn how to maybe change it so that you're a little bit more approachable when it's in a professional setting, let's say, because it's really hard to do therapy if your client doesn't want to talk to you, right? And I know it sounds like we're making you change, but we're not. You can be that person with that look, but I'm telling you that if you have that and you're not approachable, your clients are not necessarily going to approach you either. So that's something that you need to think about. Maybe you don't belong in this field because of it, because you don't want to change, and be more approachable. Here's something that I was told when I was in college, which was because again, after being a goth, I became, what do you call it? Oh my gosh, I just forgot what the phrase is. Um, grunge. I became grunge, right? Because that was the period that I was growing up in. So I was wearing plaid, I was wearing jeans with dresses, and stuff like that. And one of my professors says, "Hey, if you want to be in this field, you might need to dress a little bit more professionally." And I know that for you millennials and Gen Zers, it's like, you know, don't listen to the patriarchy and all that stuff. But at the same time, when I was younger, I agree and I believe in it because um, I think if you dress in an insane way, let's say, at workplace, you're really talking about me, 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 look at me, talk about me, look at me, think about me. And really, in psychology and counseling, it's really about the client, right? So for me, then I learned to dress a little bit less attention grabbing when I'm at work because I want to focus on the client. And that's how I made peace with it. So I feel comfortable doing that. Some of you guys might not, and I applaud you for it and do whatever you want to do. But that's something that I was told, and that actually spoke to me in that way. Yeah, okay. Um, you have the opportunity in college to meet and socialize, but do you isolate? So during college, you're meeting a lot of people. Obviously, during a pandemic, we are not, but maybe your teachers will slowly figure out how to do this. I'm trying to figure out how to do this as well, so that you guys are able to socialize a little bit more. Immigrants do not understand the new culture, speak the language, and being understood. So then again, that might cause them to feel a little bit of loneliness or shyness when interacting with the culture. So let's talk about middle age now. Life has not turned out the way that you planned it, so you might feel lonely. You may not feel the joys of our successes that we have. When children leave the home, which is also known as empty nest syndrome, where you feel alone and abandoned, right? Because you had kids and suddenly they're gone. Like, what do you do with yourself? And you feel lonely, right? And what is their purpose in life now? So I hope that as you go along and you get older, because a lot of you guys are still very young, you'll prepare yourself for those things and figure out what you enjoy doing so that when you, let's say, if you do have kids and they decide to go out and move away to go to school or go to work or whatever after they're 18, that you still know what to do with yourself, okay? That you still enjoy being by yourself and being able to work it out so that you understand what it means to have solitude and also friendships. All right, later years after retirement, people may feel like they have little to look forward to. And there are many reasons why. Feelings of no value to contribute to society, maybe because you're retired and so you're no longer teaching or you're no longer working and interacting with people. So you're like, what is the point of my life right now? Increase with disabilities such as the loss of sight, hearing, memory, and strength. And people will always say, you'll hear this as you start getting older, and I hear this all the time now, which is, oh, getting older, you're like, there's pains everywhere. You can't pick up something on the ground because you're going to hurt your back. It's actually very true. So that can also make you feel more alone because you're like, I can't do that because I'm going to hurt myself. So then you don't do those things, right? Maybe it's a loss of a job. Maybe you got fired again and you're older. So what are you going to do? Like, do you have time to go back to school or get another job? And then you might feel lonely because of that. There might be a death of a partner. So you start to think, why even live? If my partner has passed away, what is the purpose of living? And we hope that you're able to find out how to. And we'll discuss that in the next chapter as well. Some people living in convalescent homes and are happy because actually in convalescent homes or senior homes or aging adult homes, you might actually see people who are living and experiencing the same things that you are as an older adult. So then it's actually less alone. When I used to work at a senior home, they used to talk to each other. They have friends, or they might live in an older home community, right? And then they can actually communicate and talk and actually share things in common that they might not have in common with a young person like a Gen Z person. I recommend this movie called COUN. There's actually COCOON 1 and COCOON 2 that talk about like senior living. But you can also see that in The Golden Girls, right? All right. Others are alone with no family or friends visiting. And I also actually saw that as well, which is that there were some people who never had family members visit because their family members are so busy. They're working to pay the bills and all these other things. And so we hope that you will have a middle point that you will have when you are older and when you are, let's say, taking care of your grandparents or your parents when they're older, is to understand that, 100% loneliness is not necessarily so great, but overwhelming is also not so great. Let's find a middle ground. What is realistic for both of you?